If you'll bow with me, we'll start with a prayer. Father, thank you very much for all that you provide us. It's obvious that the love that you give us is immense. It's unbelievably large and too hard for us to understand, but help us to understand it, help us to move toward it and embrace it, and also embrace those around us with that same love. Thank you so very much for answering prayers for those that are sick in our congregation, those that have lost loved ones. The support they need can be found here, and that's appreciative. Thank you so very much for your word. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. So this is the last of the parables that we'll be discussing, and there are many more. There are about 5 or 6 more, depending on which group that you look at. I would really suggest that you delve into them. There's a beautiful imagery that's here, symbolism that's here, and the other 5 doesn't mean that I didn't cover them. They're not good. They're really, really good. This one was one of my favorites. So as I go through there, I'm going to have to take a couple of breaths because we went so fast and so excited that I'll probably get ahead of myself. So if I stop for a little bit, you know, I'm just trying to catch myself and go forward. It is a great, great parable. But first, I want Glenn to tell us about his class that's coming up next.
Thanks, Jack. You like that? So next week, I want to start teaching on the United Kingdom and the divided kingdom, Israel and Judah. I want to talk about some of the kings, and then there's a couple of kings in there we don't think about that I think are prime examples for us that we can learn from every day. So I'll throw that out there. Think about the 2 pharaohs, Jacob and then with Moses. Those 2 prime examples to think about also. So look forward to it. There'll be a lot of handouts, a lot of information, a lot of historical information for us to use so you can understand the good and the bad kings from both. When the tribes divided, the 10 to the 2, who was good, who was bad and different, and why and what ultimately happened to them. So I'm looking forward to that study.
I am as well. So that'll start next week here in the service. So please get that word out to everybody so that we can be here all as one. So the parable we have here is the wise and foolish virgins. You'll see me split back and forth from bridesmaids. Actually, in the Jewish documents, it's all bridesmaids. We've converted to virgins. There's nothing wrong with it. Either one is okay. But if you look at the Jewish text, it'll have bridesmaids only. I went through 5 Jewish texts for this to make sure we understood this issue about the wedding feast and why it's symbolic for us. Hopefully, I can get it to you so you can understand it as well. That's why I'm really excited about the process. But first, I wanted to go into the bulletin. What's missing from the bulletin? About a few months ago, Linda and I pulled into the parking lot, and this big truck pulled and blocked us off. And as this person that got in the truck and was trying to figure out how to get it backed up, I won't tell you his name. So don't even ask me who it is that happened in front of us that blocked us off. Now, he is supposed to be here today, but guess what? He is not. He's hiding back in the back. He is back there? Okay. We'll wait just a second. Okay, second's up. So it took a long time for him to get the truck moving. We stood there watching him. I almost got out to check his this camping permit. When he did back up, here is the scene of the crime. When he backed up 3 times, he hit that curb. So he'd back up, hit the curb, move forward, back up, hit the curb, move forward, hit the curb. So I realized at that time he was trying to find out how his curb crushing suspension was going to work. And you can see there's very little left of the curb after he got through. Now, I don't think I've seen the truck. I don't think I've even seen the truck before. So I'm sure that he downsized and got in a smaller vehicle. His motto in getting driver's license is very simple. Who needs a driver's license when he hits everything he sees? Hello, Glenn. Okay, going forward. Okay, this parable to me is really fantastic. As we left Sunday morning to take Becky to get somebody and take her to the airport, she said, "This is my favorite." She just fired up in the back, was talking 90 miles an hour about this parable because of the symbolism. Now, she talked about several things I'm not going to be able to cover. There's actually so much packed into this parable that is symbolic of what we have here we call the church, and also heaven. So let's look at it. So here's the text. It really comes from the first or the 3 chapters before that, brings it through. That's really the context. So a lot of times we get in some issues, and I want to talk about that right now. The first thing I want you to do is, in your notes, you'll see a word controversy. Please scratch that out and put difference. Controversy usually means that one's right, one's wrong. This is not the case. It is just a difference of opinion as to how individuals define the kingdom of God. And we'll talk about that in just a second. I love the way that Steve has addressed this several times in his class. It is, as we read novels or books and we go from one chapter to another, we see a change in either the individuals that are in there, what they're doing, or a different location. The Bible is different. And sometimes that will be a new chapter, but it's still talking about the same thing. And so if we get caught on that it's new, then therefore we lose some of the value of what's in it. And this is what's happened here with some of the people in the church. So they were basically divided by individuals doing the best they could, but we can't take that as gospel, that there's a new thought even though the chapter started. Now, in some cases it is, but in this case it's not. It's actually a continuation of what's going on. So again, let's look back at the few chapters we had before, leading up to this one. We don't know who the audience is. We can assume by what we see in Mark that it was 4 disciples at least, Peter, Andrew, James, and John. Maybe more. Some people say more, some people less. Doesn't make a difference, but we see that the audience is there. The sticking points hinge on this, the kingdom of heaven. What is that? Because you'll see the start of the text is a kingdom of heaven is like. So is it the church or is it the kingdom of heaven, which is heaven? And in this case, it goes back in the last 3 chapters and says categorically it's the church. Now, does it transition to talk about heaven? Yes, it does. But the focus here is the church. So we can see that those individuals that take it and say this is all is new, they lose that fact. In fact, there's not the only really issue that we have here. And we got to go back to one of the founding fathers of the modern church. And some of the things he left out in his commentary that also cause a little problem here. Adam Clarke, and you may see it as Clarke, both are correct. Adam Clarke was one of the original fathers of the modern church. He wrote 6 commentaries. The one I'm going to reference is 1831. Now you might say, wait a second, Jack, why are you referencing something that's about 200 years old? The reality is there was a preacher, and I agree wholeheartedly with this preacher, I'm not downing him, in Florida that brought out this same text from Adam Clarke and gave a sermon on it, left 2 things out. Just the same thing that Adam Clarke did in his commentary, I think are 2 very important parts. So it's continuing the same thing, continuing through our brotherhood, even today. That was in 2024 when that sermon was given. This person, as I tell you, is a great, great preacher, young preacher in the church. He just took the same context that Adam Clarke did and missed the 2 areas in here that we have. You'll see the 2 that are missing. He missed the bride and he missed the wedding feast. I think they're critical pieces in this puzzle we call a parable, so I want to make sure we include them. So let's define them first when we go through here. So who's the bride? Church, bride of Christ. Where does it say it? It says in Ephesians, Revelation, categorically. We're going to use Revelation in just a second, even find out more about that. But yes, that's the bride of Christ. Now, he didn't add it in his text, very interestingly. As to why, I don't know. He didn't say, but he didn't put that in. He also didn't put in the wedding feast. We need to define that as well. So what is the wedding feast? If we have the bridegroom, who's the bridegroom? Christ. Who's the bride? Church. Okay. So what do you think the wedding feast is going to be? Okay, it can be, but let's go more immediate. What is bride and the groom? What do we have here? Pardon me? The marriage feast. Okay, so what is the symbolic marriage feast that we have with Christ and the church? The Lord's Supper is part of it. What about the day of Pentecost? That's when the church was established. That's his church, the day of Pentecost. So we can see there are several things here that are very important that he left out symbolically when he left out the wedding feast. So again, we have the bride as the church. We have Jesus, who is the king, in this case, the bridegroom. So we can say that union of those two, which a wedding feast would be associated with the Pentecost, the day of Pentecost. Now remember that Jesus is alive at this time, obviously, because he's giving the parable. He's got to die to fill the prophecy. He's got to be resurrected, which filled the prophecy. He spends about 40-some days, depending on how you look at it, on the earth, showing people he's still alive, which is part of the prophecy. When was the church established? Not until after he left. When he left the earth, then it was a few days later that the day of Pentecost, and that's when the church was established. So we have that union at that point. Any questions at this point? Okay. So it starts this parable at the kingdom of heaven is like. This is one of many of the kingdom of heaven parables we have. So let's look at some of the variables in there, some of the symbolic figures. I'm not going to get to all of these, but the bridegroom already we've said is Jesus. The bride is Christ. Again, that was left out in Clark's original text. The wedding feast, we just talked about that union. Many things we have here, the communion and all these things that give us that symbolic reference to the wedding feast. The 10 virgins are the bridesmaids. Again, if you go into the Greek, the Jewish text, it's only written as bridesmaids, but all 10 are those that heard the word. So they've all heard the word. How they're going to react after they heard the word is going to be putting whether they're wise or foolish. Then in your notes, there's a problem here. So I did not include, included the 5 foolish without oil. I did not include the 5 wise with oil. Now, you can imagine how much time and trouble I have to put in to artificially make errors in my notes so you don't see how I'm perfect. This was an error I had put in there. So it should have both, with and without oil. We're not going to talk about this in the slumbering. We're not going to have time to get to it. This was one of Becky's major points that she talked about when she was in the back of the car going to the airport. What's the midnight cry? What is midnight reference? Remember, they went to sleep about what time? This is probably in the autumn. We know most marriages, Jewish marriages, were in the autumn. So about the time they'd go to sleep was right after the sun went down. So you figure this cry at midnight was about 4 hours at least after they'd be asleep. Now, if you're asleep for 4 hours and something happens, you wake up and immediately know exactly what's going on? No, it's immediate that you see that something is happening that's different. The midnight cry is just a fact that's going to be immediate. Some people will make pot shots at this parable because of that term, midnight and immediate, and what we see within the text that it's part of human nature, meaning that the midnight cry was there, but you see there's a little bit of time before the actual event, and they put shots at it, and I'm going to address that in just a second. But that midnight cry means immediate. See it in just a second. So buy some oil for the lamp. I'm going to tie this back to the story we had earlier in this section with the Lazarus and the rich man. What did Abraham tell the rich man when rich man said, I want you to send Lazarus home because I have 5 brothers. I don't want them to go where I'm at. And if you send Lazarus, they'll understand because he came from the dead. How did Abraham respond to him? That's right. You have the prophets. You have Moses. If they don't believe him, they're not going to believe Lazarus. This is somewhat like here. You have the wise virgins that are saying with the unwise virgins, you would need oil, go find your own oil. In other words, it's the last bit to just the rebuke that your life and what you've done in your life is going to be reward. And so this is somewhat of the same factor here. Hopefully I enunciated that correctly. The wedding door shut. Who shut the door? Bridegroom. Who's the bridegroom? Jesus. Does that mean that the door is going to reopen? No. This is immediate. It's not going to happen. No matter who you are, no matter what you want, we knock on the door. We don't have a do-over. We don't have a fudgy. It is closed. And that's the context here. The wedding door is shut. And the last is his comment to them, I do not know you. So this is the text we're going to look at, and this is some of the symbolism we're going to be dealing with in the text. Anything that you have questions right now? Yes?
I can understand that.
Thank you. Midnight cry is it is something that is going to be immediate, that no one is going to miss. That when Jesus comes again, there's going to be that cry, and then everybody's going to be from all four winds, everybody forward, everybody's going to address him. Thank you very much. Very good word. Sometimes the little words, big words get lost in the process, so thank you very much. Any other questions?
Why those are virgin without one elderly foolish one with the oil?
Can you hold on that just a second? I have it in my notes, so we'll try to get there. And let's see if I answer the question now. Can I do that? Okay. Hang on to that. Yes?
How were the virgins supposed to go out at that hour of the night and buy oil?
Good point, and I'm going to get that too, but I'll let you get to my thunder because the object is no one's going to be open. It's 4 hours after everybody closes down. No one's going to buy oil. It is a rebuke.
They bought the oil already.
Exactly right. You're not going to find it, but go out there and see if you can get it. It is not going to happen. Much like we said with Abraham telling the rich man, hey, your brothers had the same thing, Lazarus did. He got here. They're not going to listen. So, tough luck. This is not a team sport. Getting back, not a team sport. A team sport is that I get there because someone else does something for me. This is solely my responsibility, and that's what he's putting it back on them. So, okay to steal my thunder. Any other questions? Okay, let's get back here. And I will get yours, promise. So this parable is unique in its sense and the gospel accounts. And you can see it's similar to what we have in Luke 12, 35 through 38. And I'm going to give you only two of the scriptures here, but the whole context is there. Let's read. Be prepared and keep your lamps lit. Sound familiar? What we have here. The other part. You're also to be like people who are waiting for their master when he returns from the wedding feast, so that they may immediately open the door for him when he comes and knocks. Two very important things. First of all, look at the first verse 35. Be prepared and keep your lamps lit. It's up to you, not somebody else, not somebody around you. It's up to you. When the final judgment comes, it's going to be what you've earned, your reward that you're going to get. The second here is the term immediately. There's not going to be any delay. There's not going to be a wait. It's going to happen, and what you have driven or accomplished to this point is going to either propel you to one side or the other. It is that point. Any questions there? Okay. So Clark, in his commentary, goes from the point of leaving the bride out and the wedding feast out, but then has this, and I agree wholeheartedly with him. The whole imagery of the parable is drawn from Eastern marriage customs. That's why I spent so much time in the Jewish texts. Now, for those of you that keep asking me, what text am I using? So let me give you a couple. For those of you who want to do some more research on the outside, here are my suggestions. The first would be the Jewish Encyclopedia. It's a little bit difficult to navigate, but it is a wealth of information back to Jesus' time. So the Jewish Encyclopedia. The second one is it's called Chabad, Chabad, and it has a wealth of information also from customs back before Jesus all the way through now. So you have to read it and understand that sometimes you get in and read something, you have to go back and look at the text. Are they talking about in the past, or are they talking about the future? There's another one that's called the Hebraic Heritage Ministry, which I'm going to bring to you in just a little bit. And I think you're going to be fascinated of what they say is part of the wedding feast and how it relates to us. There are several others. But anyway, that's what I have getting this piece of that I have for you now today. So it's a staged event. Sometimes they'll put two in together. That's not the case in those Jewish texts. They say there's four. So the first one we have of that is called the engagement. I'll show you a document from that engagement in just a second. Now, you'll see in the text that it says the families got together. That's not really accurate. It's the fathers of the families got together. They would meet at the potential bride's house and argue a deal out. We call that the dowry. It's mohar, M-O-H-A-R, in the Jewish culture. So it's an intent to marry. It does not mean they're married, although in the Jewish religion, they're married already. Once that contract is signed, they're considered married, although there are some stipulations in that. Here's what that marriage contract looks like. This is hanging in the Yale University Archives of Antiquity Archives. I don't know how old it is. They really don't know how old it is, but it's quite old. So you see, it's very scripted out, very preliminary in nature. This one's called ketubah. That is the marriage feast, the marriage document. They had somewhat of a ceremony at the time, but this is not part of the marriage feast yet. The second is the betrothal period. We see that with Joseph and Mary in the betrothal. They were together, so that was probably the end of that betrothal period. They were together because normally they were apart, and I'll show you why in just a second. It is a covenant. In the Jewish text, it's not a law, it is a covenant. We know what covenant means for us and all the covenants that God made with the children of Israel. So it's a legal responsibility. In that dowry, or the mohar, the price of a woman was 200 shekels of silver. That's a lot of money. When it was paid to the father of the bride, and if anybody in that family of the bridegroom's family cut out the marriage contract and didn't fulfill it, that money would go to her. It paid for her humiliation for not being able to get married. So we see in the text it says the purchase price and so forth. Now, the mohar, or the dowry, is part of it, but it's interesting to note that dowry was two ways. So the father would come, the groom would come to the house, across from them, probably sitting on the floor because most didn't have tables. He would give the money. He would have the money in hand and give it to the other father. Now, after they signed the contract, the father of the bride had to give him a present. So it wasn't just one way, it was both ways. So the mohar, when you hear that, means both ways. One had to give a present, the other one had to give a present back. Any questions there? By the way, it had to be relative in terms, that one didn't get half and one got more. It was that both of them got equal base. So it wasn't numeric on one side, it was something else. Yes?
Marriages,
Correct.
so the kiddos might have been 5 or 6 years old, or are we talking about adults that were doing this?
Both happen. Here, we're talking about the wedding, so we see that probably age 13 was as young as they would be. Some were arranged earlier, and you see that within the Jewish text as well. They were not going through, the betrothal was much longer. The wedding happened later, but age 13 was common for the female to be married in that age. By age 18, the priest basically said, males, you're too old. By 18, if you're not married, you're considered too old. So things were much faster for us, for them as far as us. Any other questions? Good question. So what they had was typically about a year apart. There's a reason why they were apart. I'll show you that in just a second. So if the bride or the groom died during that betrothal period, the woman, even at age 13, was considered a widow. If she died, then the male was considered a widower. Even though they had never been married in the sense of the ceremony, that's where it was. Adultery was considered through the Mosaic law that if they had sex with somebody else, that would be adultery. It's interesting reading some of the text that alludes to the fact they kept the two apart because they didn't want them to have sex either, because that would be adultery and both of them could be taken out of town and stoned. So the parents would keep them apart. That's what I found interesting here. But then if any one of them, any of the family, not just the bride and groom, but any of the family negated the ceremony, they had to have a formal writ of divorce. Now, if you read the Kabod, you will see they'll say that it's not necessarily all the time, but they're talking about after Christ, not during Christ. The Jewish encyclopedia said categorically you had to have a writ of divorce if you're going to break that covenant during Jesus' time. In fact, they said it wasn't until close to the medieval time that that changed. So any questions on what we have here? So why would Jesus bring the marriage feast forward? He's done that now in 3 parables. And so the symbolic nature of this is going to be very important for us to look at, and that's what I want to get to now. So the third is the wedding feast. There are 2 definitions or 2 usages of the wedding feast in the New Testament. The first is the one that's most common. That is the whole week or 3 days. There are some weddings that had only 3 days, others were 5, 6 days. The lamps were extremely important in that time because the wedding or the procession started at night. If they didn't have the lamps, there were reasons, and I'll tell you about that in just a second. But the lamps are important for us here because those that had enough oil, they were the ones that were the wise. Those that didn't have enough oil were the ones that were not so wise. So they didn't know far in advance. This is somebody takes shots at this parable. I want to spend a little time with it here, but not at this point. What happened is in the small towns such as Jerusalem or Bethlehem or Nazareth, that you knew what was going on. So people that are outside the church that pick this puzzle or this parable will say, no, they did know. So there wasn't an immediacy. Because all of a sudden, when you had a lot of activity going on, the bride could assume that the wedding is going to happen. And to some extent, that is the case. We'll need to look at exactly what is going on here. So the father of the groom is going to have to go and start killing a bunch of animals and preparing a bunch of food, because that means all the people who are going to be invited are going to start going to their house. They'll have this feast for 3, 5, or 7 days. So you can see things are going to happen. But does the bride know exactly when it's going to happen? No. That's a key piece here. But it did start at nightfall. So why the lamps? The Jewish books, the encyclopedia, etc., say that this separated people out. The one that designed all of this for the bridegroom was what we call now the best man. His responsibility was communicating with the other family. His responsibility was getting everybody together to get the litter. And we'll talk about the litter in just a second, to bring the bride in, and the ceremony was going along, and the beauty of the ceremony is really nice. So if they didn't have a lamp, you're a wedding crasher. If the lamp went out, you had to get out of the procession. So we know that the first invitation we see in the past parables or other parts of the Bible is that was the invitation that was saying the wedding is going to happen. The second invitation is it's going to happen now. You've got to drop everything you're doing and go to the wedding. So it is tonight. Yes.
Parents have that kind of money or things that they have enough to have food for people like that.
Everything was based on what they had available. So it was the average, I'm talking about here, the average is 3 to 5 days. If somebody didn't have it, they would have less than that. It was only given what they could provide. It wasn't mandated. They didn't get in trouble. They were looked down upon to some extent, but they did what they had. Good. Okay, so it is at night. So the bridegroom sends the best man out to warn everybody or to tell everybody things are going on so that he gets his people together, which are dressed in fine array. I'm going to show you a picture of a recreation of this procession in just a second. So what happens to the bride? So the bride is probably told a little bit of what's going on, but does that throw us off in this parable? What did Jesus do for us? Steve covered it really well in class. Great tribulation, all the things going on, the famines, the wars. He warned us. He said, this is what you're going to see is going to happen, which much like this is here. So they met at the bridegroom's house. They started from that. They got the litter. They head off with the litter to go get the bride. and bring her back to the wedding feast. So the wedding took place at the bridegroom's house, where the ketubah, the engagement, was at her house, the bride's house. So this procession was a major part of the wedding feast. They started out again from the bridegroom's house, went over to her house, and she had to be ready. If she was not ready, they left without her. There is some of the text saying that the bridesmaids were not all together at the house, that they picked them up along the way, but let's just say that the text here says they're all together. So they lit the lamps, they're going through the streets, there's a bunch of laughter, a bunch of singing, and the singing is really amazing when you look at it here. But the night is lit up by the torches. It's said in the Jewish documents that the people would come out of their houses and line the streets and sing wedding songs to the bride. As she marched in this procession, people along the road were singing songs to her. I found that really nice. Here is a recreation of the litter. There's 3 areas. I had one other picture and I couldn't find it, but there are 3 examples of a litter that are there. One was just a platform with poles on it that the groomsmen would hold and carry the bride to the ceremony. One of them showed a bride sitting on a pillow. One showed the bride sitting on a chair. You know, my sense of humor, I thought, if they didn't like her very well, that'd be a rough ride with a chair on there flowing back and forth. But that's my humor. So then this one is the opulent one. This litter, you can see that she's inside. You'll see that all of the groomsmen are dressed alike in bright colors. And then she is in white. That's going to be very important for us. I told you, though, another text a couple of months ago said it was in red. Absolutely not. It was white. It was the whitest white she could find. So we got a little bit of this at the procession. And then that would be in the nighttime, not the day as it says here. Any questions on the procession so far? Okay. No. She was the only one in there. He was in the procession, but he was not in there. And the songs were sung to her from the people on the outside. So the fourth is the wedding feast, and here we have the second part, is that one is for the full week or so, the other is just right at the last. So let's look at the week-long first. And so what is that in comparison to what we have today? There are several things in the wedding ceremony. We had the ceremony itself, the procession obviously in the ceremony. Then we had the supper. And finally after that was the consummation of the event, which the Mosaic Law said that the bride's family had to keep that document, or going blank on a word here. Keep the proof. So the Jewish wedding was the rehearsal dinner, the ceremony, the reception, and the honeymoon all in one, all at one time, where we have that spread out a little bit further. The second part of the wedding feast is very simply just reference to the supper. Just that time when they get together, they had the feast, and then before the consummation. So both of them are in the New Testament text. This one could be either way, but we'll see that the text shows that it's all 5 days. So it's at the end of the betrothal period. Again, that's the second part. It's just before the wedding procession. That's what started. And he went to retrieve his bride at night. The night is associated with what? What would be symbolic of what we know so far about the parable with the night?
Come back like a thief in the night.
Very good. There it is. It's going to be when we don't expect it. That's the night. When people break into people's homes or they tear up our stuff on the outside here, when they do, they come at night. Why? Because it's dark. You can see things, you do things. People don't see you as well. So the night is done, it's not expected. If you're expecting it, you're wrong. That's the night here. This I found fascinating. The mikvah, and by the way, it can be spelled either M-I-K-V-E-H or V-A-H. This is the Hebrew for M-I-K-V-A-H. It is a pool, a ceremonial pool. Now, when we look at and we say that this is talking about Jesus Christ and the wedding feast that we call here the Day of Pentecost, and the bride is the church, let's look at the symbolism. So, the mikvah was not only the bath area, but it was the ceremony of the cleansing in it. The bride, when she found out that he was coming, went immediately into the mikvah. She immersed completely in the mikvah. When she came out of the mikvah, that was a representation of, guess what? That her life before was gone and her life now was new. What do we say when we baptize? It's a death. We go under. Do we go in partially? No, it's an immersion, completely underneath. And we come out, we're a new creature. Same thing here. Interesting. I want to say something. The Hebraic Heritage Ministry, got it out, says mikvah, immersion, cleansing equals baptism. That's not a Christian text. Amazing what they have and what they give us. So Jesus is pulling on that because those people there lived that. They knew what was going on. They knew that mikvah was going to mean a ceremonial cleansing of her before the wedding, and we have the same thing with us in baptism. I find that fascinating. How was the bride adorned? I told you it was white. She had to have linen, fine linen, and it had to be the whitest white. What do we see in Revelation 19:8? What does it say that the bride is like? Now, the King James Version says it's white. All the rest of the versions said it's bright. Linen, bright, pure. Exactly the same thing we see here symbolically. The way she dressed. Any questions there? You can see why I get a little excited about this thing. Slow down, Jack. Slow down. We'll get there. So the requests, which I had a question earlier, the requests of oil going on here. So we know that those 5 virgins are representing the individuals that heard the gospel. They've heard the good news. And the question that Paulina brought up, I was going to get to it, is that it doesn't sound Christ-like a Christian for them not to help out. And this is another that people on the outside poke at this parable and say it doesn't fit because it doesn't fit the servant attitude of Christians today. So let's look at it and see if I can answer the question. If I don't, then prod me. Okay? Before this, you'll see in the parable they had of the day laborers that there is the context similar to what they're saying, that we should be servant-oriented. And I get that. But let's look at the text of where we're at here. Jesus is what time in his life? What's going to happen to him within the next day or so? He'll be crucified. Has he been telling them the same message for 3 years? Yes. Have they gotten it in the 3 years? No. And he's going to give it one more time and basically say, this is it. This is it. I'm not going to go any further with it. You've had me, you've had the prophets. I've fulfilled all of the prophecy, which is amazing to look at prophecy in itself, how much is really there. So basically, it's up to you. This is not a team sport. We're past that point. If you're ready and you brought the oil, you're going to get the reward. If you didn't come ready and you didn't bring the oil, you're going to get your reward too. And that's when Christ is going to shut the door. So in a Christian sense, yes, we should be servants. In this sense, he is to the point and saying, this is it. Because there's going to be me coming, and there's not going to be a time you do it over or ask for more hours or more time. So no one else is going to help you. Basically, you're alone in this. You can't draw on somebody else. What you've done is at this point going to be weighed. Whether you go to the right or to the left, that's what we have here. So the virgins then told the unwise virgins, go buy your own oil. And we just said, that doesn't make sense if everybody's closed up. In other words, you see if you can work yourself in. But right now, there's no hope for you. So, Pauline, did I answer your question? Oh, somewhat. Okay. Thank you for the support there, Pauline. The bottom line is that what he's saying is before, yes, we're servants. This time, no, there's a point where we can't serve any longer. We have to be accountable. Jeff?
Being Christians, we're the five that have the oil, and we go out and we try to bring an example, the five without the oil.
Correct.
We've been setting ourselves, giving them examples, tell them about Christianity, tell them about Jesus and all that, and they don't accept it. There is nothing for us to do. I think it is not that we don't want to help them. We have helped them. We've opened the Bible. We've opened the gospel. Told them about Jesus. There's nothing else for us to do.
Very well put. Clint?
That's a valid point. If we look at this and you think about it, it says they're foolish. It doesn't say they're immoral or reprobate in any way. And this should shock us into the realization that in the church, if we are not prepared, this includes members, and that day happens, we will be lost.
Exactly right, which that's what I said at first. These are people that heard the news, it's their choice of what they do. Very good point. Cup?
I think it covered very well the idea of the stage, like you went through the whole process of this whole idea, the stage of where they're at. They can't borrow oil. You can't get there on somebody else's credit. You know what I mean? This is yours. Paul said, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. So even if they wanted to, they couldn't get there. You know, you can't get there from here. The stage in our life, this is what, Glenn was saying. We need to come to the realization that there's going to come a time that we're not going to be able to borrow or get help from anybody. It's going to be all on us and where we are.
Three very good points that hopefully helped you. Yes?
This slide on mine's ESV, but it adds, or it has the statement, since there's not enough for you, and like they didn't have enough to allow them to enter as well if they were to enter. So it would, to share it meant they would have excluded themselves from entry.
And I think what the three back here really define that, because it is though they have heard the word. And the choice was, did they fulfill the word or not fulfill the word? And the point was, the end was, that was up to them. But it's not that we take that and say, I'm not going to read, I'm not going to study with you, or I give up on you. That's not the point here. It says that Jesus is going to say, that's a fine moment in what you've done. That's when you get either into the wedding feast or not in the wedding feast.
I think they came back with their oil, and they knocked on the door, and Jesus said, I don't know you. And what he's saying is, we were never in a relationship. I know you, but we were never in a relationship.
Right.
So we can't. Same thing with Noah and the ark. When they banged on the door, how come Noah didn't open the ark and let them in? We're Christians. That's what we do. It ain't our door. It ain't our ark. It isn't our plan. It's God's plan. So yeah.
So good conclusion. I love that conclusion, because the bell's going to ring. So hopefully that gives you a chance, because people on the outside really pick at this through that and through the immediacy of the night. Now I want to try to get to that, but we're not going to get to that point. But very good. Thank you for the three of you, because you put it in a great perspective. You as well. Any other questions? Okay, the rest of the text is there, and you'll see at the end the conclusion. There are many conclusions we could draw from this. I only picked three. I didn't even get into all of the basic parts of this parable that have symbolism that he chucked in. It is phenomenal. Please research those out and the rest of the parables that I'm going to cover. They're beautiful. But we got to find out what's going on with that Jewish crowd to understand what he's telling us in this process.
The idea of the wedding throughout the Bible and through the relationship Christ. Going back and looking at the history of what they did in the weddings, what they, like you, with the, you know, the immersion of the woman, purifying her. She made her exclamation of her loyalty to the bride also, to the groom, as she was in that, before she was immersed in that water. And it's the same thing, it's kind of the reenactment of what we do as Christians. You know, we go into that water, and we're purified, we make our statement of who our Lord is, and our love for him and our loyalty. So the wedding feast, and that's why Paul went on in Ephesians chapter 5, like he did, Book of Revelation deals with it quite a bit. It was a very, very, we have taken it and made a mockery of what marriage truly is today. We, saying us as human beings, because we take it so lightly. God never takes the wedding lightly.
No. And that's why it's really embedded in here, which I agree. Really fast. How did the groom dress? We've got the bride. The groom dressed like a king. That means he had fine linen. That means he had to go out with the amount of money he had made to get blue, dark blue, or purple dyed clothes. He wore a crown. He was a king in that sense. What is Christ? Amazing looking at the imagery that's here, that is embedded in this parable. Okay, I will shut up because the time is over. Let me give a fast prayer and then we'll go. Dear Father, thank you for loving us enough to give us such vivid imagery within the parables. We can see what you have in mind for us. Thank you for the comments we've had in this segment for the whole time I've been presenting the parables. Thank you very much for what you've given us here, the ability in this country to still meet and talk about you and to worship you. Help us to really worship you in this next hour we have in our service. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.